Lesson 114. Distribution of property. What is the industrial problem of the modern world? The industrial problem of the modern world is the question of honesty in economic matters regarding social and civic aspects and a just distribution of property, problems of religion because they concern fundamental human rights. Some of the major phases of the problem are dealt with in the papal encyclicals, Rerum Novarum of Leo XIII, Quadragesimo Anno of Pius XI, and Mater e Magistra of John XXIII. The 7th and 10th commandments direct the exercise of justice between man and man in the possession and use of property. The rights of all must be respected. Everyone must be given his due. In the modern world, this has raised a continuing issue between the employer and the employee, between capital and labour, on the subject of returns justly proportionate to corresponding contribution to industry. The modern problem arose from the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, when machinery came to be widely used and the factory system was developed. In consequence, enormous wealth came to be concentrated in the hands of the propertied classes, while for the labouring classes there was a progressive lowering of wages below living standards. The problem has led to class conflict and class tensions in some countries. Communists have tried to exploit this situation. Industrially advanced countries, based on constitutionalism, have largely solved the problem through reform. Reform, not revolution, is the answer to the industrial problem. With great care, people will consider not only the rights but also the needs of each factor in the modern conflict. Even from the point of view of strict justice alone, something does appear unbalanced in a world tolerating economic dictatorship and immense fortunes, side by side with virtual economic thraldom and excessive poverty. What considerations are important in the resolution of the modern industrial problem? In the resolution of the problem, considerations on the rights and duties of the employer and of the employee are important. The employer has the right to a just return on his investment, on the capital, the energy, the intelligence, and other factors that he supplies in his business. From his employees he has the right to expect honest work and a reasonable care of his property. The employer has the right to a favourable reputation, without which he would fail in his business. The employee has the right to a just wage, to protection from unnecessary hazards in labour conditions, and to reasonable security in work. While it would not be possible to have all dangers in labour conditions removed, for the employee's safety dangerous machinery must be muzzled, protection must be provided against dusts and poisons of mines, sanitary conditions must prevail, etc. Why is private ownership a right? Private ownership is a right because everyone has a right to life and to all means necessary for the purposes of life. From earliest times the need and right of ownership have been recognized even among the most undeveloped peoples. Every tongue certainly has words meaning my and mine. It must be within man's right to have things, not merely for temporary and momentary use as other living beings have them, but in stable and permanent possession. Individual ownership of the goods of the earth is a right derived under God from man's very nature. Man has a right to life and must have everything necessary for the purposes of life. The 7th and 10th commandments are themselves based on this right. If nothing had owners, how could anything be stolen? Man has a basic need for wholesome living. There could be no adequate family life without some form of private ownership. Regarding other needs, let us consider the effect on the self-respect of a man if he should become sure that he could never dispose of any goods but must always be economically dependent. Let us try to imagine what stimulus a clever young man ordinarily would have who knew that even with the utmost exertion of his efforts, all he gained would finally be communal property. However, the Church does not hold the right of ownership as absolute. with complete freedom to do whatever one wishes with one's property. Common welfare makes necessary certain limitations to the right. That right is under God and subject to his will, limited by man's duties to God and his neighbour. Extreme individualism stands for the right of absolute ownership. Extreme collectivism denies all right of private ownership. The Catholic concept is intermediate. Private ownership is a right, but limited by the Great Commandments. What is a living wage? A living wage is one sufficient to support a man and his family in reasonable and frugal comfort. Man is made of body and soul, and when the most urgent material needs, such as food, shelter, clothing, and adequate conditions of work and living, are absent, it becomes very difficult for him to serve God as he ought and avoid sin. For the same reason that ownership is a right, a just wage is a right, because a man has an inalienable right to life and to all means necessary for the purposes of life. There is a dictate of nature more imperious and more ancient than any bargain between man and man, that the remuneration must be enough to support the wage earner in reasonable and frugal comfort. The wage paid to the workingman must be sufficient for the support of himself and of his family. A wage that would be sufficient to support a man and his family in reasonable and frugal comfort would be of an amount to cover the cost of living. It is variable according to conditions of time and place. A just wage should cover the cost of living for a family of husband and wife with their small children. Under American standards, it should include expenses for food, clothing, housing, and house furnishings, heat and light, transportation, care of health, amusements, church contributions, and some incidentals. In the computation of wages, it must be kept in mind that with Sundays and legal holidays, the average workman has some 60 non-working days a year. Besides, he is laid off with no work for about 30 days, and each year several work days are lost for unavoidable cause, like illness.